social media has accelerated the acquisition of customers. Like you say, it comes down to the core pillars of relationship management. Like
Mhm.
to work in this space, you could post things out and you could follow the best social media strategy. At the end of the day, it all requires how good is your product or service, and how do you treat people, and do you have a good business model that you can approach these folks with in a grassroots way.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Fabrication Friday podcast. I'm your host, Joe Fairley, certified prosthetist, 3D printing enthusiast, and owner of Ascent Fabrication. Fabrication Friday is an all-around fun time where I talk about 3D printing applications, conduct interviews with industry leaders, and much more. Come join us every Friday for an informational discussion around the evolution of the additive manufacturing field and how we utilize various digital workflows and 3D printing methods in our daily work at Ascent Fabrication.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Fabrication Friday podcast. After a couple weeks of putting out fires and running around like chickens with their heads cut off, I've got an awesome special guest today, Mr. Bryan with a Y Craft. Very happy to have him on. Bryan and I have been kind of up and coming good buddies in the field here of prosthetics and orthotics. And Bryan's been involved within the additive manufacturing industry as it applies to P&O. So without further ado, Bryan, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Always a pleasure. What is this, our second Fabrication Friday together? It
I think it
feels
might be. Yeah.
the number two. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been a while. That was a couple years ago, so really right there in the beginning. It's been cool to see how you've been able to grow this podcast, and I'm grateful to be back.
It's pretty fun, man. I honestly didn't really know what to expect getting into it. I love listening to podcasts. I listen to like two or three different ones religiously, practically every week. And I kind of had it in my head initially that, Fabrication Friday, it's going to be every single Friday. And then, things start happening and it's not every single Friday. Maybe it happens on a Saturday and then it happens every other week. But we're getting back around to it. And I think, focusing in on having some high quality people back on the podcast to just really get back to what I wanted to offer people in this podcast was a pretty wide, broad approach to what is going on in the additive manufacturing industry from a whole lot of different angles. Whether you're in the prosthetics and orthotics field or not, try to come at it from a lot of different viewpoints. So yeah, it's been a fun time.
Yeah, it's additive manufacturing right now is going through some significant changes, right? I just saw that the Waller's report. Are you familiar with the Waller's report?
I am not.
Um, so it's an industry report that's been um, a part of the industry since nearly the beginning. And each year they have been reporting the growth of additive manufacturing and the technology surrounding it. And they just released the report today, April 2nd. And that report shows that additive manufacturing has crossed the $20 billion annual recurring revenue mark. So that's a significant milestone for additive manufacturing globally, including everything, materials, printers, all
Yeah.
the different types of processes. How they get to that number is beyond me. The consultants are probably are very talented, but yeah, $20 billion industry that we work in regard to additive manufacturing. But then with O&P being the specialty here, it's really great to see the growth over the last years. And yeah, so that's a
Yeah.
random fact of today. Industry
Yeah, no,
report
for
came out.
sure. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
when you look at those numbers of, $20 billion, what does that even look like? How can you even fathom $1 billion? What kind of company does that look like? As I've started to So the couple podcasts that I listen to, I mentioned them on the last one, I believe, too. But there's The Game by Alex Hormozy, which he is definitely an intense individual, and some people might like that, some people might not. But then the other one here is Real Business Owners, and that's a couple of accounting guys that own an accounting business. But these guys are multi-million-dollar net worth type of people, and with my little Ascent Fabrication, trying to bootstrap a business, getting up to some of those dollar amounts, it's like, all right, well, what is that next step? What company do you have to be associated with in order to create a $20 billion industry? But it does shed some light on the fact that the additive manufacturing industry is pretty big and growing, I would say. I don't know how that compares to like the injection molding industry, you know.
Manufacturing in general is, I think, close to $1 trillion a year industry. And how that all breaks down into all the subsectors of industry is beyond me, but I do believe it's about $1 trillion. And thinking of like 20 billion, that's such a small factor of it, but it has grown from 0 billion to 20 billion in the last 30 years, 40 years.
Yeah. And just seeing, our little snippet of it on LinkedIn, sometimes you kind of have to take a step back and say, well, wait, there's a whole lot more fish in the pond than what we see on LinkedIn. Although, we might think that, oh, you got to have everything on social media and got to get, content out there. And, to which one point is true, but a lot of these industries, have grown all this without social media in the past.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, you got to try to get out to your customers in a different media format that way to grow that kind of business. And then it's just knocking on doors, cold calling and knocking on doors for business, right?
Yeah, that's a whole conversation in of itself, but the reality is that though the internet and social media has accelerated the acquisition of customers, like you say, it comes down to the core pillars of relationship management. Like to work in this space, you could post things out and you could follow the best social media strategy. At the end of the day, it all requires how good is your product or service, and how do you treat people, and do you have a good business model that you can approach these folks with in a grassroots way. So yeah, that's to close that point. Like social media really just gets us to the door, but you still have to walk through it. So it still requires you to pick up the phone and get through that door.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice tool to have in today's generation for future growth, I think, with the younger generations coming up into it and having that exposure already. That will be the cold calling, knocking on doors type approach for a decent chunk of maybe some of the population that's going to grow into these industries in general. Um, but I know you and I had a conversation the other day about just the nuances of trying to do this cold calling and sales type approach. And, that's what you have to do in order to grow a business. And you might think that you have a business plan 1 month, and then the next month or the next
Yep.
week, it might change, So you kind of have to try to be nimble, even if you're a big company, trying to just stay relevant in the field. I mean, additive manufacturing is changing so rapidly month over month. I mean, we can hardly keep up with new printers that are coming out every few months. I feel like they're just popping up like the spring flowers are about to. So, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a fun space to be in. You have to have thick skin right now, because they're at the moment what it feels like, and just kind of taking a step into like the O&P additive manufacturing space. At the moment, what it feels like is that there are now more options than ever, which is absolutely great because that is driving innovation and just internal or external competition, because you see competition doing one thing. It just prompts the entire offering of the entire market to innovate and continue to drive down the price. So I'm very excited to see, because I got started in digital O&P 4 years ago, and just in the last 4 years, like, it's just exploded. There's
Yeah.
companies popping up everywhere, from North America to Europe to companies in Africa and Asia. So it's really just everyone is now, who wants to get started with digital technology has options, and that's great, and it's driving innovation. But it also means that you have to have a very clear and compelling, defined voice in a busy market, and
So how
that
do we do that?
could be a
How do
challenge.
we stand out with 3D printing, with how extremely accessible a desktop 3D printer is now? I feel
Mhm.
like I've even seen the consumer side of things just blow up over the last 2 years, even with the introduction of the Bamboo Lab printers.
Yeah.
A relatively cheap printer that takes out a lot of the slicing headaches that we've had in the past of trying to figure out print settings. And now these companies have had so many years now to develop good print settings that, any Joe Schmo like me could, order up a printer, their first printer, and hit print and come out with a pretty decent product, that they just download offline somewhere that someone else designed, right? So how do you think we stand out in that kind of field where consumer level 3D printing is becoming so accessible?
Well, I think I really think that if companies such as Ascent Fab or Spinties, or any company that is in this space right now that is focused on adoption of digital technologies, focusing on your two customers is how you differentiate yourself, is that user experience, that the practitioner who is driving the, whether it be the printer or the service or the software, the material, whatever it is, that experience that the practitioner has is of key importance. And then the patient who is going to be fit with that device, if that device shows more quality over their traditional device and more quality than what can be achieved with other companies, then I think that those two things are what separate the adoption of the technology within this space. Like, if you could focus on practitioner use and patient use, that's how you really stand out, because there's a commoditization of these printers, and there will continue to be, and there will be automation of modeling, and there will be automation of slicer settings. So like, to me, the real focus has to be on your end users solely, at least in my role. And then as we have tech teams who focus on the tech, what is the experience of those end users through the technology at which you can develop for them?
Yeah, no, I
That's kind of
have
my
to
thoughts,
agree.
right?
Yeah, with that, it's the user experience aspect of it. It's the analogy of looking at the Apple iPhone and looking at how much product design went into the box that your iPhone comes in, right? Listening to one of these other podcasts that I heard, it's like, well, people hang on to the box that your phone comes in just because it's so nice. You know,
I have like 3 in there.
yeah, well, there,
I-
point in case right there, you know,
yeah,
point, whatever it is. But, you know,
to me, it's critical, Joe. Like it's if you cannot deliver an exceptional experience
Mhm.
for the technology and product or service that you provide, then what are you doing? You know, if you have friction in that experience, go on friction hunts and understand where the friction is and address that so that you can better your experience so that you could stand out in a busy marketplace is kind of like what's been my thoughts over the last years of development, because there is friction and nobody has a perfect experience at the moment. And I
Sure.
don't know if there ever will be, but on that pursuit to an amazing experience for your end users, if that's the North Star, you find that the technology, just the efficiencies and the simplicity and everything associated with it, is a byproduct on your focus of what the end user wants. And I do think that that's what Apple does, and that's probably why they're leading still. I don't know how much longer. If you check out their stock prices as of recently, they've gone through some challenges, but
Oh yeah.
they always come through it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I haven't paid attention to them recently, but just seeing how they innovate every year with bringing out a new phone, bringing out new features and software updates continuously. It's the overall end user experience and how you package that all together. And you want to feel good about the purchase that you just made, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's $10 or $10,000, you want to make sure that the entire experience, and it comes down to, people too. It comes down to that product support. What happens after that sale is made. And I think in the additive manufacturing industry, I think there's like two different tiers to that, I think, because you got the consumer level 3D printers, right? Where you're kind of just on your own, or you're going down the Reddit, rabbit hole, or on other forums.
Paying for courses
Yeah, yeah,
on YouTube. That's when. Sorry to continue your thought, and then I'll come
yeah.
back around.
No, that's okay. So you're kind of just on your own with those low level printers. And then on the higher end of things, like so for any of the industrial printers that we service, or any of these other industrial 3D printer companies, you have a person you can call when anything goes wrong. If you have a misprint, if you need help with slicer settings, if you need help with um, design for additive manufacturing techniques, I try to harp on that very heavily, because it's a new concept for some people, especially our P&O crowd. But you have these two different tiers of support, and you kind of have to expect that with some of the price tags that these are coming with. So, but otherwise, if you don't offer that product support and you're at that higher range, then what are you doing, right?
Yeah, yeah. That to me, to provide without support, um, is foreign to me. Just because it's just foreign to me. But I guess I understand sometimes when things are priced at a certain level that are low compared to the value that they bring, then adding support on top of that. I try to understand all aspects, but that one is complex to understand. But when value is high and price tag is low, support on top of that could be a cost drainer to the company, so they choose not to support. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't get it really. It's just my limited understanding of that. I always like to
Yeah.
support as we provide service. But
Right.
what I was going to say was I got an A1 uh, Bamboo Lab, the A1 when it came out, not the mini, but
I
I
was going
had
to
this
ask if you
idea.
had a printer of your own yet.
Yeah, I got one a couple months ago, and I thought that this was going to be the, I thought it would be the way to produce upper extremity orthoses for hospitals and clinics that, because upper extremity orthoses don't reimburse that well. So I was thinking, what if we could be able to have a sub $500 printer or a sub $700 printer? I don't know exactly how much it was. And you could be able to produce these custom made orthoses in an hour or two. So I took my file, which was a professionally made file for an FDM printer, and loaded into the printer and just pressed print, making the mistake that everyone does, that this is just going to take care of itself and it's just going to do what I want it to do. And it definitely did not do that. I had like 5 failed prints in a row. And all this to say, like, without that type of support that I could have gotten by like phoning Bamboo Lab and saying, hey, here's my file. Is this the right file for your hardware? What are the right slicer settings? Without that, I was struggling. Like I was. And I have been in this industry, like I work in additive manufacturing, but I am on the sales side. So I'm not like loading the printer every day.
Sure.
But you would think maybe I had a little bit better understanding, but when I kept seeing those failed prints and I didn't understand why, that was complex. And I could see why sometimes people try things and then hit headwind, and then because they're so busy or whatever it may be, they put it to the side because they've got other things to focus on. And tinkering sometimes isn't in the best interest of everybody for the amount of time that it takes. So yeah, it just gave me a lot more perspective of actually owning a printer and the expectations that I want it to do. And then it comes back and it's like, okay, no, you actually have to fine tune this. And it's not just a plug and play system as I thought it may be.
So with that, was that the first part that you had tried to print on it, or did you try to print something else before that?
Well, I printed a Benchy and it printed fine. Everything was good. But what a wrist hand orthosis is quite long and thin. So the optimal settings, I thought that what I was under the impression of the A1 was that it was as plug and play as possible. So I thought that I could just input this file of this long, thin, lots of open holes for extremity orthosis, and it would just print beautifully. And I was wrong.
Yeah. What kind of issues were you having there? Was it just bed adhesion or
I think it ultimately came down to bed adhesion, because once it would get up to the top of the orthosis from the base to the top, it would just flop on its side and then continue to print and create a big spaghetti monster. But the orthosis would be on the floor when I would come in, and so I started adding brims, and I started to then fine tune, and ultimately it was decided that the A1 was recalled, so I had to send the printer back before I could finalize the settings on it, which was a bummer.
Yeah, no, that was interesting. I think I just saw yesterday or today an email come through saying that they had upgraded the heated bed, that their cabling is all new because they've had problems with it.
That was a thing. They took my printer back and refunded me all my money because of the possibility that that cord on the back of the heat bed would fray and cause a fire. I don't know if there was any fires that actually came of that, but I was kind of relieved that they recalled my printer, because I truthfully didn't have the right expectations going into it, and that was a reality check. So next time I get a printer, I will have the right expectations.
For sure. What other hands-on 3D printing experience have you had, like actually doing any printing?
Yeah, well, I used to work for a company here in North Carolina. It was based in a clinic, and we had a couple multi-jet fusion printers, and nesting the builds for the multi-jet fusion printers and understanding the thermal radiance and how things are work in that build space through materialized magics. That was a lot of fun to actually nest those parts together.
Okay.
It actually brought me a lot of joy as well, because I was in business development and I sold all of those parts. So then I would then go to, how do we print all of these parts in one single go? And obviously, doing the maintenance on the multi-jet fusion printers a couple times, not often. Unpacking builds a couple times, not often. That company understood the mission of Bryan being a salesperson. Got to go fill more builds. So I didn't spend much time actually printing parts.
Gotcha. Nice. Well, I mean, that's a pretty unique experience already. I've never had any experience packing an MJF printer yet. I do design for MJF parts, um, but just had the pleasure of finally touring through my third party partner, MJF printing partner, just a few weeks ago. And man, if you're gonna do MJF, you got to go as big as these guys go. Um,
Yeah.
they've got like 40 machines,
Well,
and you have to have like the process around it, right, in order to stay efficient with that technology. Um, because I asked them, I'm like, so what if, like, to cut down on some shipping turnaround time for me, what if I had one of your MJF printers and I'll do some printing, outside the O&P field, obviously, for it. Let's pack the entire build, and let's make it, cost effective. But what they told me was, for them to really think it's a good business move for them, I would have to have 6 of their MJF printers. And that's
that's
the
a lot.
6 of them, right? So,
Yeah, that's
that's
a lot.
what, a $3 million investment about. Um,
Yeah, and the amount of volume that you would need to be able to justify that, which, I mean, if they have 40, they're doing crazy amounts of volume.
no, so talking about 6 MJF printers and trying to make that a viable business move, it's just, again, that's a big number, and the volume you have to commit to in order to get that. I mean, so this company was already in the general manufacturing space of injection molding and doing other, CNC machine parts. So they already had customers who were looking for parts from them, right? So for them, it's just as simple as swapping over equipment, really, and then understanding how that equipment can be applied to what they want to do, and increase their efficiency and maybe decrease on some overhead and labor costs. But yeah, no, I was just trying to make the point that, having a very unique experience for yourself of the Bamboo Lab A1 Mini to then the, HP multi-jet fusion. I mean, that's a big jump there, for understanding how to design parts, how to slice parts, how to post-process those parts, and what those parts cost, and
Yeah.
just kind of like what the applications are for it. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been cool as well. Like I've had a chance. Some of our clients today use like DLP and SLA. So there's such a wide, really, that's about it. DLP, SLA, FDM, and multi-jet fusion, SLS, with some great technology that's coming. But all of these different types of printers and materials have been leveraged in my day to day in some way over the last 4 years. And that's been really cool. And the truth is, like, all the design for each different material and each different printer is different. Like, there's not like one design that fits all of these manufacturing processes right now. So that also adds a little bit of a fun challenge to the role, is like, okay, here's maybe a standard design that we use, but how do we apply it to this new printer and material? And how can we control quality if we're not producing the part? So there's a lot that we try to anticipate, and yeah, it's a blast. It's a blast.
Yeah. Well, so what's going to be your next printer then? If is the A1, you're going to go back to the A1, going to be a, very driven customer to get that back once it's ready, or are you looking at something else now?
I don't know. Like, for me, what really stood out, because I got the A1 really because of a couple things: print time, cost, and accessibility. Like that was what I had in my head. Like, okay, this is a lower cost printer that prints in good speed and is easy to use. Like those barriers to entry for me as a user of additive manufacturing in the past seemingly were blown away with this printer. Reality is it still required a little bit more legwork, but it was a cost-effective printer. It was relatively accessible, very accessible actually, and it printed quite quickly. So I was happy with that. However, I think going into my next printer that I have, I think I want actually to kind of just jump into SLA. Like I want to go into some resins because I think that upper extremity orthoses with resins is yet to be unlocked fully.
Yeah.
Especially for fracture management. I think that if you could be able to scan, model, and print a upper extremity cast or orthosis within a couple hours, that's going to add a lot of value to patients and practitioners across the world. And I would really like to figure that out. Just as a tinkerer on the side that doesn't require a lot of tinkering, hopefully, because I don't do that exceptionally well, but in that next printer, it's still got to be cost effective. It has to print fast and it needs to be accessible, but it will likely be a SLA printer.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I personally haven't had any experience with SLA or DLP. So there's a couple different ways to cure that resin, right? There's the light curing, UV curing, or heat curing, or a combination of both. And I think they're even coming out with like a third version of that combination. So that area of 3D printing, I think, has a lot of growth yet to be had for resin printing in general. I would see upper extremity orthotics doing pretty well with DLP or SLA simply because you're going to have a nice smooth surface finish, right? With hopefully relatively low print times. I don't really know kind of what you're looking at there. Are you going to be printing that in under 2 hours? I mean, that would be,
Well, there's some manufacturers, OEMs of printers that make those claims at the moment, that they can print that fast.
Yeah.
However, like one of our partners today bought one of those printers, and the analogy of good, fast, and cheap comes into play here. Like you can only pick two, and it prints fast and it prints cheap, but the quality's not good. Therefore, like I still think that maybe it just needs to be the industry needs to mature just a little bit more before that 1 to 2 hours is consistently hit. However, there's some upper extremity companies in this space that are making that claim, and I think that it's kind of a it's a disservice to our end users because you don't consistently hit 1 to 2 hours with good quality 90% of the time. You just don't. It requires a lot more post-processing to get the quality good. Therefore, the time that you save on printing, you pick up in labor. So I think that the vision that I would have would be that 1 to 2 hours, and I would like to get a printer and try to crack that code. But at the moment, it's I don't think reliable at scale at 1 to 2 hours right now.
Yeah. I was going to say, is that
4
like
to 6.
actually reasonably feasible? And is that something that people are asking for? And what type of end user, what type of clinician is asking for that? So, currently with some upper extremity orthotics, as I understand them, they're thermoformed, just in a hot water bath, right? By PTs and OTs, who are seeing patients in rehab facility settings, right? Low temp plastics that are done, custom, right, directly molded to the patient, right? So is that what you're trying to compete with, or is there then like the next stage of, this doesn't really have to be done in 1 to 2 hours, but like, what's the thought of why should it be done in 1 to 2 hours?
Yeah, so this has been the age-old question that I've asked myself over the last years, like, and what we have resulted in is for chronic pathologies such as arthritis, tendonitis, a ton of the carpal tunnel.
Yeah.
These pathologies, though the splints are fabricated and fit within a couple hours, they don't require a couple hours of time. Like, you're gonna have this pathology for a while, and that's why you're wearing the device, maybe to alleviate some pain,
Mm-hmm.
to improve mobility, a ton of different reasons. It's not, you're not being given this device because it has to be fit on you within 2 hours. That's not the reality, but that is a lot of what therapists think, because this is the traditional way. It's fit in a couple hours and the patient's on their way. But what we found is that if we can increase the value of the product significantly more than what traditional poses, then asking a patient to come back in 1 to 2 weeks is no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Patients love coming back to know that now I'm going to be fit with a device that is waterproof, breathable, lightweight, low profile, everything that I need customized to my literal anatomy, with a 3D accurate 3D scan. They don't mind coming back for chronic pathologies. So we really leaned into that model and tried to focus on chronic as much as possible, because it just makes a lot of sense to the patient and to the practitioners with the limitations of the technology today.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there is a total untapped potential within the fracture management, sports management area of expertise that do fit devices quite quickly. But they're, just to poke a little bit of holes in that story that I just said, there are things associated with immediate injury, such as swelling or edema. Like, you could fit a device within a couple hours, but within a couple days, that limb is going to be smaller in volume. So you're going to have to fit another device, or that device that you fit originally has to be adjustable to meet the change in volume of the limb.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of challenges here, but I think that number one, a sustainable business model, and with the existing technology today, you have to focus on chronic. And then number two, if you want to get into the traumatic focus, you have to ask the why. Like, you and you have to think of design differently than what is traditionally on the market, and maybe what you've traditionally provided for chronic pathologies. It has to be a different type of design.
Right.
That kind of goes into some of the thinking there, but that was initially when Spinties was getting started in the US, the beginning of 2021 or the end of 2021. We were focused on traumatic and chronic upper extremity, and we had to really just shift focus to chronic only. But I'm still in curious on how to solve this traumatic side.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting that you bring that up. From time to time, there are government grants that are out there
Yeah.
to solve some of these exact issues. And, we were actually contacted to try to help see if we can come up with a solution for something like this for traumatic injuries, for soldiers out in a wartime zone. Could be upper extremity, could be lower extremity, but it's going to end up being on the spot care where they otherwise want to replace the need. This is what I like about it. They define the problem very succinctly. They wanted to replace the need for inventory of devices, which 3D printing does extremely well, right?
Yes.
You're still going to have an inventory, but your inventory of materials can otherwise make several different devices, right? And as long as you have the right printer, you can have, with a pretty large build volume, and pretty versatile in the hot end componentry that's hot enough to withstand some of these materials that are abrasive. um, you can end up with a pretty versatile on the spot solution for wartime efforts by putting a 3D printer in a combat, um, you know, triage type tent, where you've just had a soldier that's injured and they otherwise need maybe an upper extremity orthosis that, utilizing some parametric design, you could come up with a pretty neat solution for that. Again, if we're thinking about what we're competing with, we've started with total contact plaster casting, right?
Yep.
That transitioned to fiberglass casting as some new materials came about. And then maybe then there was low temp plastics, or maybe somewhere in between that, from plaster to fiberglass. I don't know the history of upper extremity, traumatic and chronic, musculoskeletal disorder care goes, but just thinking about what we're competing with, right? If we're going to think about this holistically from a product design and a consumer experience standpoint, the plaster casting was hot, not breathable, and not waterproof, right? And then you've got fiberglass, which is a little bit lighter, and there are some colors to it to kind of personalize that. Some low temp plastics have some different colors. Now getting into 3D printing with a whole myriad of different colors, you could have marble or gold PLA,
Yeah.
and personalize that otherwise with an embossment of the person's name into the device or something like that. So there's definitely that we can see that progression coming. And
Yeah.
I think we are, taking these real life problems and trying to come up with solutions for them that otherwise I've heard the term from my MJF partners where they say, MJF was a solution looking for a problem. And, we can't really think about it that way, because if you do think about it that way, that you're trying to create a solution without the best problem in mind to solve, then you're backwards in your approach and you end up with a overpriced, overbuilt, or underbuilt and underpriced, machine or product that otherwise really isn't solving any problem, right?
Yeah, that discovery prior to development of technology is incredibly important. Discovering the problems that you're intending to solve. And though there's like, before any development ever begins, there's always some open-ended questions that exist prior to development starting that you project and you think you know the answer to. However, as the tool is developed, you then you're like shown different things and different optimizations. And then after the tool is released and adopted, it's continually changing too. So it's interesting that the case of HP. I think that in many ways they got lucky with O&P finding them. I think so. And O&P developing solutions around multi-jet fusion. I absolutely know it took a lot of resources and time and thoughtful development, but I don't think that it was as like we're going to go to the CPOs and ask them what they think of this, but I don't know really. That
that's
is
for
just all
$500,000
from the
machine.
sideline.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I could be completely wrong. But from the sideline, it looks like that maybe they got a little bit lucky there in the beginning.
Yeah, I think looking at it from a standpoint of prosthetist orthotists kind of always want to over-engineer things just to beef them up and ensure that they are long-term patient ready. that when people thought about 3D printing, they didn't think about your maker bots or your Ultimakers of the world. They didn't think about your Prusa Lab or your Bamboo style printers being anywhere close to producing a patient end use product, but they saw HP and they saw some of the quality coming off of that, and they're like, oh, well, this definitely changes the game, right? That's what kind of led to a few of these early adopters to really be comfortable saying that these are long-term devices, that they were putting their license up against, putting their practice up against, and saying, yeah, we feel comfortable, we feel optimistic about the long-term structural integrity of these parts. But I think, again, I mean, I've learned a heck of a lot over the past 2 years of just being involved with designing devices for this purpose. What materials are you using? What post-processing are you doing to it? And that even goes to, say, for FDM too.
Significantly, yeah. All those, the thought that goes into a STL file is much more than what anybody ever really puts on paper. Like you have to think of much of the constraints and variables that, especially for patient-specific design and patient-specific products, where you really have to dig back on what is the outcome that's desired of this device, and first put that there, and then work on post-processing and materials and design and printing capabilities. Like, what do you want to do with this patient? And then let's match a solution to that. And it takes an interesting toll to try to look across the whole span of capability and find that perfect one for that patient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, we get back to, design for additive manufacturing techniques too, right? I've thought about recently, how do I be more efficient about the post-processing aspect of this? With my, ups and downs of having some help here at Ascent Fab and not having some help at some times, and having to wear all the hats and go back and do all this grinding and buffing and finishing of some of the devices. Starting to think about something as little as, you mentioned putting a brim on the orthosis to help with bed adhesion. We're now designing the brim into the part to be more easily removed from the part, instead of relying on a slicer program to just simply put, concentric rings all along the first layer of a print, just to save on material, save on print time, and literally just save on the amount of time I have to spend at the grinding wheel. If I can otherwise snip it off at a couple angles and do a little bit of buffing versus 10 or 15 minutes for every device finishing it, that goes a long way.
I pray to the additive gods that we have a print process and material that requires minimal to no post-processing in the future. Like, if that could be delivered, we will see significant adoption. So that is sometimes what I pray before I go to bed. Because post-processing is one of those things that you don't really anticipate in depth until you really get into the weeds of device after device after device after device. And I applaud you for looking at ways of how do we design this better so that this is less, but there's still some.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you bring up an interesting point there that I wasn't really aware of or really even considering. Is FDA regulations around what we're doing. So I have a very close contact of mine who has gone through this type of regulation process before, and has been 3D printing since, I don't know, 2010, 2011. And he's a CPO. So I
Nice.
greatly respect his opinion. But he mentioned to me the other day that we have to be careful about how finished a print is after it's printed, because if you just simply put a device from the printer directly onto a patient, you like skyrocket in FDA clearance needs.
Mm.
So it goes from being, I'm gonna mess this up, but is it FDA, class 2 device to a class 1, like
So
the,
class 1 is the lowest. That is your traditional orthotics, all of
Mhm.
Spinty's. So we went through FDA registration as
Yeah,
well, and all of our devices were class 1, but then class 2, class 3 require
right.
specific certifications like the 510K
Mhm.
uh, that you have to have for a cranial remolding orthosis, or
Right.
such things that the QC and the quality process and how that device is made really become evident with those class 2, class 3. So yeah, you're hitting it right on the head.
So one to two then, I think, was the jump
Yeah.
of, you have a little bit more regulation around that particular device if you're going directly from a printer onto a patient and having no post-processing whatsoever. Um, versus, having this other custom approach where we are customizing trim lines. We are otherwise taking off brims or support material or annealing a part afterwards. So I think for now it's good that we have some post-processing needs for that purpose.
Sure.
You know, uh,
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that.
I think that, let's give the case of cranial remolding, right? So I think there has to be this step of you're customizing it for a particular patient. And where does that customization step come in? You have to do something. You have to modify the device somehow after it prints in order for it to be that lower class. But simply because of cranial remolding, being on young kiddos, that obviously institutes a much larger risk, potential risk to that patient for that device. So they're already into the class 2 devices, which have been interesting
Yeah.
as well, to think about how you could otherwise print those from FDM needs instead of MJF, just for cost purposes. Um, but that's a
Yeah.
big
Well,
jump for FDA clearance.
3D printed cranial remoting orthoses, that was something over the last 24 months now that there's like actual 3D printed helmets that have been 510K certified. Now you should come to expect that other companies should be releasing their 3D printed helmet because there's a like or similar, and that 510K certification process is significantly reduced now that there's a like and similar on the market. So
Mhm.
it would be interesting to see about FDM, um, if maybe that will reduce the cost, because I know that some of the adoption challenges that these cranial remoting orthoses that are available today, some of them, is the cost of them. They're just so expensive compared to traditional means, even though traditional may not be as reliable when it gets down to the pocketbook of the clinic. Um, they have to lean into sometimes what's the most cost effective.
Right.
So other print technologies could help alleviate that barrier to entry, I think. You're proving it.
Yeah, I mean it's a cool space to be in too, right? Because we're constantly trying to think up new ways to do age-old processes, really. So, being at the forefront of that is pretty fun, I think. And it's been keeping me going, knowing, the 80-hour, 100-hour work weeks have gone by. And, I've just turned 31 and probably have way more gray hairs in my head and beard now than I had just
I've got some.
now almost, well, we're gonna hit the 3-year mark for Ascent Fab toward the end of the month here. So, hitting 3 years and right now on a skyrocket trajectory period. So, that's pretty cool to see. But I kind of owe it to a lot of my customers that this has been a roller coaster of a let's see what works phase. We have to put our clinical experience into it, but whether you're in the prosthetics industry or P&O industry or not, you kind of have to go about this prototyping phase more or less of making sure that you have all these I's dotted, T's crossed to make sure that these devices are strong, that they're effective clinically, that they look good.
Yeah.
From FDM standards, they have to look good, right? I mean, I'll tell you right now, none of my customers have been excited about an FDM printed orthosis simply because of the surface quality of the parts. Even if I print them with a 0.6 millimeter nozzle, 0.3 layer heights, it's still not enough to them to see the underside of an SMO that has the layers in it, where we've had to then rip off support material and buff and grind it as best we can. People just haven't been excited about it, even if it's there's an embossed logo or there's a different color there.
So what gets them excited?
The cost of doing it, we can really do it on a $250 artillery sidewinder machine. That has a very big build volume, 300 by 400, that we've printed some really nice parts on. But that low cost of the printer and then, being able to use some other relatively durable materials, polypropylene, printing pretty consistently. But so it's the cost that drives them to it. They think, okay, well, where's the in between? Well, right now there's really not an in between. I tried to see if SLA would be an in between of, there's surface quality there. It's cheaper than MJF, but the structural integrity wasn't there for whatever material they had tried. This one company that I was testing out. So
Have you ever considered tumbling your have you ever tumbled your FDM prints?
I've never done it. I've toyed around with the idea. But then that's just like one other piece of equipment that I would have to have, right? Because like I've talked to another O&P facility that does MJF printing, and I said, well, could I send some parts to you guys to vapor smooth for me? Some FDM parts to vapor smooth. And it's like, well, sure, we can probably do that, but what's the turnaround time and the cost going to add to an FDM part? And is that worth it for an FDM part?
That's a good question. And that's a question that has to be, it's almost like if you do invest more into the FDM part, like you then just should justify going to the big Cadillac. There is no in between, like you say. It's
There's really
interesting.
not.
I haven't thought of that because I've been laser focused on multi-jet fusion and definitive use parts through that, and then just trying to dip my toe in personally on FDM. But yeah, that's an interesting road to be on. I think that you should consider tumbling. I've seen some amazing FDM prints that are tumbled that don't look like FDM prints. And
Okay.
they print them and they put them in the tumbler with the water and the dish soap with the rocks, the ceramic rocks, and they just let them sit in there for a couple hours, pop them out, and they do look much better than when they went in. I don't know all the exact variables of that process and exactly how it works, but I've seen some good stuff, and it also works with like multi-jet fusion and the SLS parts. You can put them in there and see some
Sure.
smoothing happen.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. I'll definitely, think about looking into that a little bit more too, because I'm already looking into a couple different ovens that are low cost, relatively low cost, priced appropriately, like with a printer package deal, basically, for annealing processes for post-processing. So yeah, should look and see what's out on the market right now for tumbling.
As if there was nothing on your mind. There's another thing I'll put on top of your mind.
It's the things that keep me up at night, or the Saturday morning 9 a.m. as I'm trying to have something of a weekend.
Oh, that happens to you too?
Oh no, what do you mean? I don't work on the weekends. What do you mean?
What is that? Yeah, I don't call the weekend work like work unless I'm behind my computer. But over the weekend, I am researching, that's for sure. And like all the challenges of the week, like
Yeah,
I I can relate to that.
yeah.
Trying to figure out solutions on the weekend.
I found it really nice when my wife recently changed jobs and she now works on Sundays. So I've like kind of gained a very selfishly gained a weekend day back. She has off Fridays now and Friday, Saturdays, and so, she kind of has her day though on Fridays and she loves it, and I have my day at work to catch up on things on Sundays, um, which works out pretty well, but definitely have to balance that with, the staying personal and home life is home life and
Have
work
to.
work life, and just be cognizant of it. Even if you are doing something at home, being aware and being in the moment with someone while you're doing those things, or just so that they know that you're doing those things, I think goes a long way in terms of the respect that you have for each other. So yeah, working on the
100%.
weekends, definitely a necessary evil, I'll say, if you're in kind of our positions of, trying to always continuously, have the right mindset about our customers and our partners.
Yeah. It's a process of and it's like for me it's a lifelong process of managing my life work balance. Um but you're right, everything you shared there as ways to optimize that process, I've adopted too. And with our work being on our phones, sometimes we're looking at our phone and we're researching or working, and it looks like we're just totally disengaged. And in some ways, we are. We're focused on something else, and but also, not doing anything, talking to anybody, but on LinkedIn or with Joe.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying. It's all about balance and communication, and
Yep.
all of that's really, really relatable for me.
And having your hobbies too, right? So, I mean, what's my hobby? 3D printing. I mean, uh,
All
so
of your hobbies have to do with work.
so here's the thing though. Like I love what I do, so I was in, okay, let's just put this in perspective. Well, I'll go off on a rant here for the last little bit of this. So, looking at work-life balance, looking at becoming my own boss, which is scary as hell, I'll tell you. Scary as hell when you're in charge of your own paycheck every week and you're like, okay, what food am I putting on the table this week or tonight? So that aside, having the thought that you're continuously looking for um, things that you can enjoy when you're at home and when you're at work, and understanding that if you enjoy what you're doing, you're not working a day in your life. I don't really buy into that, but um, coming from a day in, day out CP, certified prosthetist position, at a clinic that I was working at, was getting worked pretty hard. And with dealing with the traditional ins and outs of a busy business, I don't attribute, some of my actual burnout. I feel like I truly was burnt out by the end of my time, as a clinician, as a short time as a clinician, although trying to get back into that now. Um, Looking at how I brought that work home emotionally and mentally is much different than how I bring home Ascent Fab work or, any of my other additive manufacturing work. Whether it's on a weekend or, just home after office hours, right? I enjoy what I'm doing so much that I can, it's not really like flipping a switch for me. In
Yeah.
my, conversations with my wife, I'm now, there's always like I bounce ideas off of her all the time.
Nice.
I try not to put too much on her so that, like I haven't asked her to work in the business, directly, because I want her to have her own, actual thing that she has and her own time. Um, but it's about having the wherewithal to enjoy what you're doing and realize when you're not enjoying it. Because when you're not enjoying it, then think about what you're going to enjoy, or can you otherwise work around different people maybe in the same industry or with the same company even to make it more enjoyable? Because once you get to the stage of burnout, man, it's hard to have that not go into other aspects of your life. So,
Yeah, you spoke a lot of truth there. It's burnout is terrifying, and it's terrifying. I haven't yet had burnout in like a serious case of burnout. I've been burnout of like relationships with bosses and stuff, but like with a company or industry or a specific role, I haven't yet had that. So I'm very fortunate and grateful. However, I'm kind of scared that that could potentially happen one day. So always trying to keep that in the forefront of my mind, like what type of passionate things can I do in my role, and where can I find passion for what I'm doing, so that when I do take it home, it's out of love and not out of like like because I feel required or like I am just up against the wall. It's just because I love doing what I do.
yeah.
And that type of passion really drives me. And and it's not every day. Like I I was talking to you before we kicked this thing off. I've had a rough day. Passion is low.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
searching for that has been the kind of thing that's kept me going throughout all this time too, is just
Mhm.
searching for the passion to make it these challenging days, when you close your computer and don't pick up your phone, to get you to go back tomorrow to pick up the computer and get back to work tomorrow. So
Right. And it's that feeling of not having guilt when you go back to turn your phone on or you go back to flip open your laptop and not having that feeling of guilt of what did I miss when I wasn't looking at it, right?
yep,
Um, to the case in
being
point,
okay. Yeah.
exactly, right? I've we're getting pretty deep into this now, but I've literally just gone through that today, and that's I sent you the text earlier,
Yeah.
the room's on fire, and I'm sitting around thinking this is fine, this is good, we're fine, because over the last 3 days, over the Easter holiday weekend, I've been moving apartments from Friday through today, basically trying to do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible with the time that we had and trying to do work for half the day on Friday. And like I just mentioned, I typically do some work over the weekends. I got to no Ascent Fab work over the weekends, and I'll be honest, yesterday, right, Monday, yeah, I was feeling a little, just feeling bad about not getting to some of these things. But then I need to stop myself after I have a great conversation with Bryan and be like, look, that's okay. Tomorrow's Wednesday. Tomorrow's another day. You've got another day to get it done. You have good relationships with your customers and you understand, what those lead times mean. And,
Exactly.
you know, you try to under promise and over deliver so that, when things like this come up, that you need to take some personal time to do some stuff, then, people understand. And if you just talk to them, people are very understanding when you have a, formal conversation with them and be like, hey, look, I just had this thing happen in my life. That's, my personal life. Gotta go take care of this. And then I'm going to be 110%, on you the next day. So, just
That is what I love about O&P is that I most of everyone in this, I would say 95% are okay if you approach challenges with a humanistic
mm-hmm.
perspective. Like, I'm a human, I need time off to move. I'm sorry if your order was delayed a day. Like,
Yep.
okay, it's okay. You have to move. Like O&P practitioners give you that, where 95% of them, 5% do not.
Sure. Like
We don't do
anything
that.
else, right?
Yes. But I think we are fortunate to work in such a profession where we work with professionals who have their own lives and understand, and that does give us a little bit of grace and like understanding our own roles in this whole thing. Like if you can't get to it and get it completed, you just need to communicate why. And
Mm-hmm.
people are smart enough and compassionate enough to hear you, and that's all about your partners. If you set yourself up with partners that are kind, compassionate, and visionary, then when you need to get real human, they'll get real human back.
Yep. I absolutely agree with that. It's have to have that personalized approach and, it's tomorrow's another day, right? Tomorrow's another day. We've got more great printing to do. Bryan, if you're looking for a new printer and want to try something fun at home,
What do you got?
Cocoa Press.
Oh, yes.
Have you heard of Cocoa Press?
Do you recall, little quick side note, do you recall Clubhouse during COVID? The app Clubhouse where we all logged into these rooms and people would be sharing perspectives. Do you remember that?
I think I heard about it. I never did it though.
Okay.
Yeah.
I first heard of Clubhouse, or I first heard of Cocoa Press on Clubhouse,
Okay.
where they were just about to launch, and they had this idea of this chocolate printer, and it launched, and it was super widely successful. So you have that printer?
So I was looking at getting it on its like original release, like pre-release, and I was ready to go and I was all about it last year. And then we kind of got toward the end of the year and I was like, well, I'm spreading myself already a little too thin. I can't go even more thin for a more or less hobby printer now. So haven't gotten one yet, but I looked back at it online the other day. Thinking about pulling the trigger now.
How much
Um,
is it?
I think it's like 1,500.
It's not bad.
So I mean, for an edible printer, I think it's pretty awesome.
I think
I
it's
think it
pretty
was
amazing.
about 1,500, 1,200 to 1,500, maybe somewhere in there. But currently, you have to, well, you don't have to, but I probably will print some of the components myself. So you have like the attachment points at all 8 corners of the machine that you have to print yourself just to have those connection pieces, and they can be obviously personalized whatever color you want. But yeah, no, it comes as a kit that you can put together and have fun putting together a printer, and then you get to print and eat your prints, which I think is awesome. and so many
Amazing.
other applications for chocolate 3D printing that I think, we could get into for hours here. But Cocoa Press, if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's fun stuff.
I haven't seen it in a while. So I'm glad that you reminded me of this printer, because now I'm going to be dreaming about 3D printed chocolate.
Well, if I end up getting one here in the near future, you'll be one of the first people I send some chocolate to. So
Send me a logo. Send me an Ascent Fab logo. I've already got one sticker, but I will take a chocolate logo all day long.
sounds great. Love it, man. Well, Bryan, thanks again for coming back on the Fabrication Friday podcast. I appreciate it. And anything else here that you think these people should know about you? I know you got your own, YouTube space as well. Want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm on all social media, which is LinkedIn and YouTube. I don't do TikTok or any of those, but Bryan with a Y. That's where you can find me. I am trying to grow my YouTube presence, trying to just diversify a little bit from LinkedIn, where I share a lot of professional industrial 3D prints of custom orthoses. And on YouTube, I'd like to just share more of the ins and outs of this entire space, and just my perspective and some of the cool things that I get to see. So find me on both of those, Bryan with a Y. And yeah, no, thank you, Joe, for the opportunity to come on board. It's always good to chat. Hopefully others found our conversation insightful.
Yeah, no, I definitely did, and appreciate the time. And yeah, looking forward to when you get your next printer. Thanks everyone again for listening to the Fabrication Friday podcast. Tune in next week or the week after, who knows, might be 2 weeks for the next episode. But when it comes out, I'm sure that you guys won't be disappointed. So thanks again, appreciate it. If you have anyone who would otherwise benefit from listening to this podcast for any type of 3D printing knowledge or experience, please share it with them and reach out to us at any time for some tips and suggestions. So thanks again, everyone. Appreciate it, and happy printing.